Good afternoon and welcome to Hope Partnership's webinar for October, Clergy Self-Care, the Freedom of Boundaries. Our guest today is Chesla Nicholson, who is on staff at Hope Partnership as the Minister for Leadership Development, and she works with a lot of pastors, those who are doing redevelopment, those who are doing new church starts, and helps them discern the call that God has for their life. And so we're glad you're with us today. We look forward to an informative presentation. My name is Matt Rosine. And to start off, we'll begin with a word of prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for this time that's before us, and we ask for your Spirit to move through this technology and for your word to be present. There are so many burdens that pastors carry and so many roles that we share, and so God, we ask that you would give us your grace and give us your courage for the task of ministry that we have ahead. In the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Just a brief word of explanation here as we get started. You're welcome to participate in today's conversation, and there's several ways you can do that. First of all, we want you to know that your phone has been muted, so if there's any background noise on your end, you don't need to worry about that. We can't hear it. If you do have a question or a comment for Chesla during the presentation, you'll see that there's a chat feature in the window in front of you. You're welcome to use that and to send us a message here at Hope Partnership, and we'll do our best to get to all those questions. If not during the presentation, then after the presentation. And then when the presentation is over, you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback for us if there are ways that we can improve these, or if there are topics that you'd like to see us cover in the future, or speakers that you'd like to have us have online for questioning. Please let us know that. Today's session is being recorded, so it'll be available on our website just within a couple of weeks. And so we're glad you've all joined us, and without any further ado, I'm going to invite Chesla Nicholson to lead us through this conversation about clergy self-care. Chesla?
Good afternoon, everyone. So glad to be here with you all today. We are talking about clergy self-care and the freedom of boundaries, and how allowing ourselves to maintain certain sacred spaces in our lives gives us the freedom to be more effective, to be healthier, and to simply be better pastors. I did some research looking around for statistics about clergy health, and I found what was startling to me. And this is a graph from Duke University research that they've been doing on clergy care, and they've used a sample from North Carolina of United Methodist clergy, and the ones that have the circle in red are places where clergy are at substantially higher risk. And so that is for high cholesterol, borderline high blood pressure, hypertension, for asthma, and for prediabetes or borderline diabetes, and all places and spaces that could be prevented. And so I thought that was a glaring example of how poorly we as clergy tend to take care of ourselves, which takes me to a quote from the study, which is, the study found that pastors' sense of guilt about not doing enough work was a top predictor of depression, and that doubt of their call to ministry was a top predictor of anxiety. Pastors with less social support, those who reported feeling socially isolated, were at higher risk for depression. Now, that quote told me several things. One, it talks to me about the effect of feeling guilty. Guilt usually comes from some outside source that makes us feel like what we aren't doing is something that's negative for everybody else. That if we don't do everything that the church has asked us to do, then all of a sudden we're no longer being good pastors. And when we feel that way, that also makes us question our call. If I'm doing so horribly and I can't take care of everybody, is it something I'm really called to do? Which really is about how our pastor-congregant relationship is set up, the dynamic of church leadership that says the pastor must be the end-all and be-all and do-all of everything, which we know that makes for poor leadership, poor health of clergy, and poor health of a church that is not empowered to also be able to pray and be with one another and sing and talk and preach even. When we don't empower them to do that, then when we die, they die. When we're sick, they're sick. And that's a codependent relationship that's never healthy and does not allow for growth. this quote, I deserve the care I give to others. I have no idea why I first heard this quote. I have no idea who first said it. It was not me. I'll be clear about that. However, it was so powerful to me to hear such a thing. The idea that as much time as you spend taking care of other people, you also have to take care of yourself. As much effort as you spend in getting to hospitals and talking on the phone and responding to emails and sitting with people and holding people's hands, you also have to be sure that your hand is being held, that you are being nurtured. Otherwise, all of it becomes rote and even disconnected from the reality of whatever the situation is. I've seen people who have spent years literally taking care of other people and never being taken care of, and it begins to wear them. After a while, they cannot hold the face anymore of with a smile and pretend like everything's okay. They begin to literally fall apart because they have never allowed themselves to be taken care of and to be nurtured, and no one was nurturing them. So we must remember that we deserve care. We are children of God just like everybody else, and being clergy does not mean that we don't need anyone. It means actually the opposite. We may need more care and support. To harken back to the quote, the last part of that was about not having a social support system meant that anxiety and depression especially were even a higher risk for clergy who felt isolated, which means that we have to be, if nothing else, we have to be able to support each other, to be mindful with each other, to remind each other to take care of yourself, and whether that means physically, spiritually, socially, emotionally, intellectually, in all those ways, we have to continue to work on being our best, most whole selves. And in that, working on ourselves, we also have to remember our families. Some clergy who are married, have children, or not married and don't have children, that sacred group of people that you call your family does not have to be sacrificed. Even when Abraham had to sacrifice his son, there was a ram in the bush. And so that tells me that not even our families, especially not our families, can be sacrificed. And I was thinking about how important it is, especially as a family with a clergy person and a congregation, to even model what it means to take care of your family, what it means to be there for your family, what it means for your family to come first. And that is the first ministry that you have. People watch that. More than what you do, we all kind of know this, more than what you do, people pay attention to, more than what you say, people pay attention to what you do. So when, you miss a soccer game here or a talent show there, but if all the time you're missing all the things that your children are doing, or you're never making time to have sacred space with your spouse that is free from phone calls and emails and drop-bys, then all that does is dwindle the relationship with your family. And people see that, even though in the moment their need is being met, but they see that you aren't meeting the needs of your family, and what that says to them about how to treat their family members. And so let us remember that there is a ram in the bush. You don't have to be there all the time. There are other people who can help. That also allows you to empower other people in your church to be leaders. And it reminds us of our own humanity and that we are not the Messiah. There are just a few scriptures here about how important it was for even Jesus. And now we aren't Jesus, right? But even Jesus took so much time away to be alone, to be with us. So the first one is from Mark. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. He prayed alone, by himself, away from other people. I imagine that was a prayer with just him and God. Really just kind of preparing himself for the day, or being centered, or simply just because Jesus spent his whole life with people and Jesus needed time away. So if Jesus needed a time away, surely we needed time away. And then Matthew 26:36 tells us, then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. So even when we have our social support, kind of thinking of disciples a little bit as a social support here. They hung out with Jesus a lot. They did work with Jesus. So Jesus had spent time with them and wanted them to pray also. But even in that, Jesus still needed time to Jesus himself, to be away from the crowd, to be away from people who drew on his energy, which we all have to be mindful of where our energy goes and how we are stewards of our energy. That's something we also have to be mindful of. And then at daybreak, Jesus went out to a solitary place. The people were looking for him, and when they came to where he was, they tried to keep him from leaving them. Again, Jesus had to have time away to pray, to rest, to be away from other people. And people were always trying to infiltrate that time that Jesus had, just like they will always infiltrate your time. There will always be someone who wants an exception. There will always be someone who says, I know it's Friday and your day off, but I have this one thing that's really important and I need you to deal with right now. I know it's Sunday morning and you try not to have conversations before you preach with people, but I got this one thing that's really important to me that I really need you to deal with right now, absolutely. I know that it's Thursday night and it's your date night with your spouse. However, so-and-so is in the hospital and we really need you to come pray right now because, of course, we don't know how to pray. There will always be people who will want an exception to your sacred space, your sacred time, your boundaries. Just like Jesus. Jesus needed time away. Jesus needed to pray. Jesus had friends. And Jesus always had people infiltrating his space and draining his energy even when he was trying to recoup. You're not Jesus. So that's not going to be as easy, if you will, for you. You'll have to maintain your boundaries to free yourself to really pay attention to yourself and to your family to, again, be most effective with your congregation. I feel like I'm talking very fast because I tend to do that. Okay, are we okay? Good. All right. The other thing is, often while we are trying to take care of people and while we are serving, sometimes we create a pedestal or we get on a pedestal that's been created for us that comes with our title or our position. And some of our guilt comes from trying to live up to what we see as the ideal of a title position. And reminding ourselves that we are not our gifts, we are not our titles, we are not our positions, helps to decrease some of that guilt around not reaching those ideal aspects of whatever our gifts and our title and our position tend to make us feel. We're trying to get away from that. So title, position, and gifts are not who you are. You are a child of God who is here to serve. And even if you weren't Pastor so-and-so or Reverend so-and-so or Dr. so-and-so, or even if you couldn't sing with the best professionals ever, you would still be a person who is serving God by serving others. And that allows you to continue to be a wonderful person with gifts to continue to move forward and serve people and serve God. Now, so there are often times when we get so wrapped up in doing the busyness of work that we forget to be spiritual beings, to be human, to be people that can spend time in prayer, can spend time simply walking, can spend time looking at a sunset. And often when we finally sit down and have to reflect and think and pray and listen, we begin to find our truest selves. We settle in and figure out who we are. And those are difficult things to deal with. However, when we are engaging in spiritual disciplines and allowing ourselves to go deep within and without, we begin to see and interact with our inner polarities and contradictions for the purpose of figuring out how to work with those, embrace those, and be effective even in our inner contradictions and how to work that out, what that means for us. Often what helps with this is having a therapist or a spiritual director or someone in your spiritual support group who can be your pastor, and you can really hash out what your inner contradictions, your inner polarities, your inner confusion is all about, so that you don't impart that on the people you serve. Okay. Now, here are a couple of definitions of boundaries, and specifically personal boundaries, that I want to remind people about, to even just think about the idea that just because you're a person who serves God and people for a living does not mean that there is not space just for you. Your whole life, all of your energy, all your time cannot actually be dedicated just to serving people, because you still need to sleep and eat and take a walk and laugh and have some type of joy and peace that is just your own for your own personal health. And so the first one is simply something that indicates the furthest limits as of an area or a border. Then we have something such as a river, a fence, or an imaginary line that shows where an area ends and another area begins. A point or limit that indicates where two things become different. Boundaries, unofficial rules about what should not be done, limits that define acceptable behavior. And then I added this: personal boundaries, guidelines, rules or limits that a person creates to identify for him or herself what are reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for other people to behave around him or her, and how he or she will respond when someone steps outside those limits. Now, the personal boundaries is the one that I'm really driving here, because I feel like personal boundaries are the ones that get the least amount of steadfastness, the least amount of attention, especially for clergy, and especially when clergy are dealing with smaller congregations where everyone feels like family. And so if you are a pastor, you belong to us, and we should be able to have your time and your energy, your skills, your gifts, anytime we want, however we want, and on demand. However, that is not healthy, and that gets us all in trouble. It gets us in gray areas ethically. It gets us in gray areas with our spiritual, emotional, and physical health. And it creates dependency. And it also allows for every person in the congregation or the people you care for or in your faith community no room for their own growth as well. So think about how you can create personal boundaries, how you can set up ways for people to understand what is permissible and impermissible in the way they deal with you, in the way they talk to you, in the way they behave around you and your family. So this is what I'm offering, to set boundaries around your disciplines. So spiritual disciplines help us to get a better understanding of God and ourselves, and boundaries help to keep us protected and also healthy. I'm proposing it's a good idea to set your boundaries around whatever your spiritual disciplines are, or developing your spiritual disciplines. So whether yours is, a full 24 hours when you disconnect from Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and email and simply turn off your phone, or evening outs with yourself, your spouse, your kids, a weekly movie date, annual vacation, a walk around downtown, a drive, whatever it is that speaks to you, a run, a day of video games, a day of comic books, whatever it is that is going to speak to you, a discipline that speaks to who you are authentically, gets you closer to God, and allows you to be one with yourself and how God is asking you to move. And so begin to think about what that means for you and what that will look like for you, and try writing that down. And I'm suggesting that once you figure out what that is, what are your spiritual disciplines? What do I say, like the top 3 spiritual disciplines for you that should be sacred, that should not be able to be infiltrated by anything or anyone? What are those things that really feed you, that are life-giving for you, that really connect you with God, connect you with yourself, and because of that, end up connecting you better with other people? What are those things? write those disciplines down, and then decide for yourself in a schedule, an actual calendar. When will these things take place, and how will I mark that off? And so maybe for you, it's 1 hour every single morning. Write that down in a calendar, write it down in a journal, and share that with everybody who has access to your time. So if you have a secretary, an assistant, whether it's your the church board, your spouse, your family, make something tangible for people to know. This time is off limits. This time is my time, 1 hour every day where I spend running and praying and being with God. This time every Thursday is my time with my family. And those other times I cannot be reached. In those times, these are people you can reach if you need me, and I will get back to you after that. But making that something that is real, even better, it's good to put it out electronically, and I know we like to save paper and we like to conserve, but having something hard copy for people to look at, to go to, makes it even more concrete. So people begin to really understand that this is my personal boundary. These are the limits around how you get to behave and contact me and be within my space. Now, I chose this particular picture as a background because for me, this exemplifies what happens when we set boundaries around our energy, our time, our space, our spirit, and allow ourselves to be fully who we are. And so if you're looking at it on your left, you can see barely the image of this person. And I imagine this as the person whose identity is completely wrapped up in their title, their position, and everything they do is because it's what's outlined in their job description or because of what someone told them is what clergy do. And as you go towards your right, this person is becoming more and more aware of who God has called them to be and how God has called them to be by spending more time in whatever spiritual discipline that they practice that works for them. And in that time, allowing themselves to be more confident in who they are and who they're called to be. And then as you keep going right, they're sharing that with other people now. And other people are standing around the frame that's left. And this person can go free and move freely until you finally get all the way to the right. And the person comes out of the concrete that has trapped them and held them captive. And now with arms wide open and in a position of free movement and dancing, this person can be truly who they're called to be. They can truly function well because they're healthy in ways that speak to their spirit, to their body, to their mind, to their soul. And because they can move freely, they can then be more effective in everything that they do. And so they are now at their best serving God and serving others because they themselves have spent time figuring out how I can be healthy so that I may serve others. And this is just about the sculpture. I often get asked about it, and so feel free to Google image it and look up Zenos Frudakis and his work, which I really, the fact that it's actually about being free and breaking free, struggling free, what it means to take time to work towards that kind of freedom that comes when you really had to struggle to set boundaries with people, to make your time sacred, to spend time in prayer or walking or running or eating well, how difficult that is. Any questions?
Yeah, we've got a few questions here. Let's. I want to point out a question from Douglas. We've had a few people responding to comments online, and so Douglas points out that when he went to seminary, he's a pastor, he didn't learn these boundaries, and so it took other experiences, other events where he finally learned these and is integrating them into his life. But do you have other suggestions, Chesla, for folks where we can learn more about living this life with the freedom of boundaries? Are there books you'd recommend or maybe other resources that you've come across that might be helpful for folks if they're wanting to learn more?
There are several books on spiritual discipline. There's lots of actual research being done right now. And if you go to the Duke University website, you'll be able to find some of that. And they have quite a bit of resources to offer. Also, I mean, if you just go in any bookstore or go on Amazon and just Google or put in the search Clergy Self-Care, you'll find lots of book resources. And I also suggest you finding a clergy friend to talk with who may offer resources in personhood and presence, which I think is the primary way to really learn about boundaries and self-care and how to make that work for you. But yes, also we have our Leadership Academy twice a year where we talk about it. There are resources actually on the Disciples website, the DHM website. We have some on our website, Hope PT. And that's all I can think of off the top of my head. But yes, so the Duke website, putting in searches on Amazon or anything of that nature. Actually, one major book that I have been going to a lot more recently is a Monica Coleman book. She is a clergy person in California and also an academic. She's also a professor at Pacific School of Religion. Thank you. And her most recent book about being a clergy person with depression. It's a reflection journaling type book, which I think is a great resource.
Let's see. We have a question from David. He points out that there are lots of times that sometimes we get trapped in losing our ability to take care of ourselves, and sometimes it's when we're trying to live up to those expectations of what a previous pastor did in a church where we serve. You know, what do you suggest for pastors who find themselves in that position, where they're serving in a church and parishioners are constantly reminding them of what the previous pastor did or holding them up to those expectations? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, this is a great question, David. Thank you. Because this is something that pretty much every pastor who's at a church where there's been a previous pastor deals with. People will always want you to do what the previous pastor did in many ways. And what I think is this becomes a great opportunity for preaching subjects and for leader development in the church. This is a great opportunity to have conversations with the board or the trustees or whatever group of leaders there are in the church about who you are, your vision for the church, how you are with them, and to really draw them into your vision, into your style, and then to have them kind of be your cheerleaders in the church, reminding people that the former pastor was wonderful. We're just going to say that, no matter what happened. That was your pastor. And you are working with them now, and you are ready to do new and different exciting things with them. And so I think that's one great way. I'm sure there are lots of other ways, but one way really is to use it as an opportunity to develop leaders and help and give them skills, and at the same time teaching them who you are and how you want to be with them.
One last question, I think, today comes from Douglas, who he suggests that one way that we could protect the boundaries in our congregation is to share the binder that you mentioned, the list of our boundaries, with maybe 3 or 4 other key leaders in the church who can help us and maybe even be, I like this term, co-guardians of our boundaries. You think that would be helpful? Any other suggestions for that?
Absolutely, Douglas. Thank you. I do love the term co-guardians, and that's exactly my intent for saying to even share this binder that you come up with for your boundaries. I'm sharing it with the co-leaders and with and I just had another idea. It would be a good idea to even have your leaders, your other leaders in the church, also have this type of boundary and binder, so that it doesn't just become about just this is what the pastor needs, and so this is what we've got to do. But this is what we all need. I, as a pastor, and as a human being, and you also, as leaders and humans, you also need time and space that is off limits to others to infiltrate in that kind of way. So I think that's an excellent idea, and it would be very helpful to share the binder with other leaders of the church, and also at least one other person who will hold you accountable, even when you break your own boundaries. So maybe your best friend or someone you consider your pastor, or someone in your peer group, circle, support network who you can hand your boundary binder and will remind you, hey, you said you were going to do this every day from 8 to 9, but you just told me you have a breakfast meeting at 8:30 a.m. That seems like it's out of your boundary. What are you going to do about it? So I think that's also a great idea. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, you can see on the screen here Chesla's contact information if you want to keep the conversation going. She'd love to hear from you either through email or Twitter or Facebook, so reach out to her, and if you have a specific situation, I'm sure she'd be happy to respond to that. We're grateful for your time today, Chesla. Thanks for that. Thank you all for signing in and being a part of this conversation.